Anywhere, exactly, anywhere else.
Well, welcome to those of you who have just gotten on the call or on the Zoom. We were having a nice time getting to know our speaker. So good to see everybody. Michelle had said that originally 85 people had signed up, but we don't know how many people did the re-registration with the coming into Zoom.
Annissa, you can take that as a real kudos because as we're recovering from the pandemic era, that's a really good turnout.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
you're a hot ticket.
I don't know how to take that, but I'll take it.
Hey, yeah, please take it. Please take it.
No,
It's meant as
it's
a
a huge
compliment.
compliment.
So Annissa, the person underneath you is Barb Harris. She's also on our board. And she's our fundraising chair, and she's in charge of our 20-year party. And we just invited her, Barbara. And the other person is just coming on is Jean Calandrino, and she is our president-elect, and she's also our finance officer, bless her heart.
Thank you for going virtual. I'm getting to become a wuss about going out.
That's good. That's good.
When
Hey,
it's
who
cold,
says that?
I like to be home.
Yeah. We're teachable. We're flexible.
Yep.
Learn how to slide and glide. And we appreciate the people that re-registered so you could get the Zoom link, like Marianne Tipton and Sue's iPad and Judy and Sandra and Susan. Marianne, we made the decision yesterday at the board meeting, same as last month. It was just like, okay, here we are again, cold weather, bad weather, what do we do? So we made the decision to go virtual again. We're trying to take care of each other. Michelle is recuperating from surgery, and she would have had to have come with crutches. That would have been hard to navigate, but knowing Michelle, she would have tried it. We all would have been worried about her.
Yeah, I probably would have done it. You all know me.
We try to take care of each other. So for those of you who are just joining, we're just kind of chit-chatting. I'm Karen Francis, and I'm the president of Women's Voices Race for Social Justice. And I put my personal email and my phone number in the chat in case you have any questions or you would like to touch base about anything that is going on with our awesome organization, then please reach out. Because we really don't have time at our program meetings to do that. And it's just nice to be able to talk to someone on one-to-one. I see some of my friends from other organizations also on the call. And so Annissa, Nancy Price is on the call. She's also on the board. And Linda Mauser, she's on the call and she's very involved with some of our racial justice work, especially passionate about issues with housing. So just kind of giving you a feel for who some of the people are around the table. It's always better in person, but I think we made the right call for tonight. Michelle, how are we doing with the waiting room?
I'm admitting people as they join, so currently
Okay,
22
thank you, friend.
participants, and
Well, we'll give it a few more minutes. Does anybody else want to say anything? I have my Valentine sweater on.
It's Galentine's Day.
That's right, Galentine's, and I have my Valentine mug.
I just want to say thank you, Annissa, for doing this and for being flexible about going on to Zoom. You're on mute.
I try to mute myself in case my son comes busting in the door. No problem at all. Thank you for being concerned about everybody's safety.
And another one of our board members I see just joined us, Ann Litwin. Ann is our chair of our Racial Justice Committee. So I just want you to know who some of the players are around the table. I apologize, I don't know all of you individually, but I'd say before another year as president, I will hopefully get to know all of you on a one-to-one basis. It's just not the same, but we want to take care of each other, and that's why the board made the decision to have this meeting again virtually to protect ourselves from the weather, and we don't want anybody falling, especially since our Michelle would have been coming to tonight's meeting at the center of Clayton on crutches, and we didn't want anything to happen to her. We don't want anything to happen to any of you, but you know what I'm saying. But knowing Michelle, she did persevere and gotten there. She was surprised when I told her when I had my fractured leg that they wouldn't let me use crutches. I had to use a walker. That was the stance at the hospital I was in Florida. So Michelle, do we have any idea how many people are still waiting to come in, or should we go ahead and get started?
no, no one's waiting because I'm letting people in as they ask to join, and so we can start anytime, and I'll just admit people as they join.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Most of you know I'm Karen Francis, and I am president of Women's Voices, Racial Social Justice. I want to share our mission. Our mission is to identify, research, and discuss critical issues, to mobilize, energize, and inspire ourselves and others to action, to work as individuals and in community for social justice. And our vision is women working together to advance a world that values equity and justice for all, abolishes discrimination, and protects the planet. We have, over the last year, also started our meetings with a land acknowledgement statement, and I will share that. We begin this gathering by acknowledging that we are on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Osage Nation, Missouri, Illinois Confederacy, and many other tribes who were and are custodians of the land where we reside, occupy, and call home. We recognize their sovereignty was never ceded after unjust removal. We give appreciation to those indigenous people for the use of their stolen lands. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm and support the tribal sovereignty, history, and experience by elders past, present, and generations yet to come through their connections to this land. And today, there are over 183,400 Native Americans living in the state of Missouri. As I was saying earlier, and as soon as we have our date, but I want everybody on the call to know that we will be celebrating our 20 years as an organization. And I think we chose the date, but don't quote me completely. I think we chose Saturday, April 26th. to celebrate our founding mothers that brought this wonderful organization together. We are very involved with the community, and we want you also to be involved with the community. So if you don't have my personal contact information, I've put it in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me as just to talk about what Women's Voices is doing, or to say, well, Karen, what can I do? And I can give you a lot of suggestions on what you can do to support this great organization. And one of the things we have coming up is being sponsored by our Racial Justice Subcommittee. And their name is long. It is the Criminal Legal System Reform Group. And Karen, are you going to speak, or is Mary Schuman going to speak, or is Ann going to speak? One of you tell us what we're going to be doing.
Oh, okay, well, I can go ahead since I have compliments for Mary and she would not compliment herself. We have a wonderful opportunity. We still have a couple of seats available. We're going to Jefferson City on Wednesday, March the 5th. And how we do this, we did this last year and it worked beautifully. We all meet usually in a parking lot like at Plaza Frontenac or something like that. We have rented a 15-passenger van. This will be no cost to anyone because we received a grant from Empower and it covers all of our cost. Mary does great research on the legislators that we want to talk to. We are assigned a partner, a pair, and the list of people that we want to see, along with research on all of them. So last year we hit over 50 legislators. Sometimes we had to talk with their admin or other people associated with them, but mostly we did get to see them. So we're very excited. And of course, we are educating and advocating for clean slate, which is automatic expungement of criminal records based on certain criteria. We currently in Missouri have this expungement, but you have to go through this lengthy, confusing process and pay a lot of money. So what Clean Slate would do would automatically expunge these records. So that is our purpose. And let's see, we will be providing lunch. And we usually leave around 2:30 or so. So you're usually back by 4. Would be happy if anyone wants to join us. Please look at our website for registration information. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Karen. And any questions? The pregnant pause. As an educator, you kind of wait 7 seconds. So now it is, I'm excited to introduce our Director of Advocacy, Marge Doss, who is going to introduce our speaker. Thank you for all of you joining us. It's going to be a very interesting, exciting, educational night. And I can't wait to hear from our speaker. So Marge, it's all yours. And if everyone would please mute themselves so we don't have background noise interfering with what is going on. And our speaker also said graciously that she would take some questions at the end of her presentation. So sit back, enjoy advocacy in action as we learn. So Marge, it's all yours.
Okay. Well, I first heard Annissa McCaskill speak last summer. We were just figuring out about a year ago, maybe, during the 21-day challenge that the YWCA puts on to have some challenging conversations about race. Long overdue in St. Louis. And I was very impressed with the background information that she had and the data about her organization, Forward Through Ferguson. And Forward Through Ferguson believes that one day St. Louis can be a region that achieves racial equity, a state in which life outcomes are no longer predicted by race. and embracing the Ferguson Commission's mandate. They center impacted communities and mobilize accountable bodies to advance racially equitable systems and policies that ensure all people in the St. Louis region can thrive. Women's Voices had wanted a speaker to note 10 years since the Ferguson uprising. And I think that you'll find that Ms. McCaskill is a great speaker for that topic. So I will leave it to you, Ms. McCaskill.
Thank you, Marge. So good evening, everyone. I actually will say that this is probably less scary for me than the 80-something people that I probably would have been facing if we were in person. So greetings. Again, my name is Annissa McCaskill. I'm Executive Director of Forward Through Ferguson. I'm going to share screen. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
So let's get going. Again, my name is Annissa McCaskill. I am Executive Director of Forward Through Ferguson. My pronouns are she, her, and that is my email information in case anybody just wants to stay in contact with me. You did mention some things about Forward Through Ferguson, and I'll go a little bit more in depth. So let me backtrack and introduce myself a little bit. I have lived in St. Louis or the St. Louis region longer than any place else in my 53 years. I moved here in 1996 to attend Washington University School of Law after earning my master's of public administration at Indiana State University. WashU was familiar to me. St. Louis was familiar to me. I grew up about 4 hours to the east in Kentucky. My sister had also attended Washington University School of Law. I actually earned my master's in public administration because I wasn't sure if I wanted to be an attorney. What I did know is that I wanted to impact policy and I wanted to definitely make a difference in the lives of those who typically were not heard and were often marginalized, I felt, by those who were the policymakers and those who made the decisions. And so I went and earned a master's in public administration. I interned at Indiana General Assembly and understood the legislative process. I learned how to read and write statute. I learned how lobbying worked, good and bad, but I also understood the ability of the human voice in the process, whether it was individuals who were contacting their state legislators or it was people just showing up to advocate on their own. And that was something that always struck me. So when I moved to St. Louis and I attended WashU, that was something that stayed with me. And I went to law school because I always said I was going to be an attorney. I had no definite reason other than I wanted to be an attorney. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, and I was miserable in law school. So by that November, my sister, who had told me that I didn't want to be an attorney, but I'm stubborn, um, and I had a conversation, and I knew and she knew that I was going to finish that first year of law school, but I was not going to become an attorney. My father was deceased at that point, and we decided it was best for me to hold that information from my mother until it was time for me to withdraw. And so I withdrew. Um, After my mother drove 4 hours and had me look her in the face and tell her that I was going to withdraw. And her only response was, well, you can pay your own rent now. And I did. And I entered into municipal government and became a city planner, which at my heart, in everything that I do, I still consider myself to be a city planner because in the end, city planning impacts people, places, and things, but more importantly, how people live. And so while I'm not doing physical planning and looking at blueprints anymore, I am on the human side of city planning and urban planning, in that we're actually touching on the things that in most cases municipal government and their urban planning divisions don't necessarily always address in the beginnings, but possibly in part of their processes. So that's just an introduction of me and kind of my journey. My bio's long. We're not going to get into that. It's too long. So about Forward Through Ferguson. Forward Through Ferguson is an anti-racist systems change organization that charts a path toward racial equity. Marge was very kind to read the information of how we define ourselves. We were born out of the Ferguson Commission report. There were a number of mandates. There were 189 calls to action in the Ferguson Commission report. But the one thing I will always point out to people is that that report, while it has the Ferguson Commission as the authors, it is actually the people's document. If you were in St. Louis when the Ferguson Commission was doing its series of meetings, it was a process in which community challenged authority and everyone sat as equals around the space to create what their concerns were, to call a thing. I liken it to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that they had in South Africa at the end of apartheid. It is something that this nation has never seen. And I say, especially looking at where we are right now, unless someone is very, very brave and finds the ability to move through the current climate, I don't know if we'll ever have anything like the Ferguson Commission again. And so I want to call that out because that was a courageous thing that this community, that this region did. And I want to also point out that our name came from the Ferguson Commission's title. It actually says, Forward Through Ferguson, a path forward. As we know, the Ferguson Commission report came out of the death of Michael Brown Jr. in 2014. And one thing I always want to point out more recently, it wasn't out of some type of feeling of regret or sorrow at the death of Michael Brown Jr. The money for the Ferguson Commission actually came out of economic development funds. It was bad business for the state of Missouri to have laid bare everything that was going on in the breadth of the uprising. So in seeing all of these young people, all of these old people, all of these clergy, all of these agnostics, all of these atheists, all these queer people, all these straight people hitting the streets because enough was enough, the state of Missouri recognized that this was bad business. You had international press shining a light on Missouri. But what I will say is it shined a light on Missouri, but it actually shone a light on the entire nation. Missouri was just a microcosm of everything that was happening. But the money for the Ferguson Commission and its report came out of the economic development funds that the state of Missouri had. That was the seed money for the commission. But what was done is that seed money, which in most cases people would not think would benefit community in the real way that it could, was actually utilized in a way that I think benefited the community in ways that are generational, far beyond a TIF, far beyond creation of a business district. And I want to call that out because it was courageous to say, this is bad for business, but it also is bad generationally. And a seed was planted with that money that will last longer than any building or street that could have been used with that money. Who FTF is. So we were born out of the Ferguson uprising. We are one of the requests or one of the actions that the commission requested. They requested that a nonprofit be formed in order to be holders of the 189 calls to action. This is our staff. As you see, there are 10 of us. There's no way for us to handle 189 calls to action. Rather, we act as field builders. We act as catalysts and wayfinders. I say that we are a bridge between the grassroots systems holders. So we have those who have the power, right? We have those who can make the decisions and make things happen. We have the grassroots who are doing the work and also drawing attention to the things that must change. And so we have the ability, because of how we came to be, to hold those accountable parties accountable, to work with those individuals who are at the grassroots, to bring them to the table, to mobilize them, and to bring those two together, and then to also remove ourselves from the process so that the two are working together. We work and we create strategies and structures, a transformational process and principles. I want to be clear, especially in today's climate, and this conversation started probably a couple of years ago. Forward Through Ferguson is not a DEI organization. We definitely believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think we see now the fallout that occurs when you do away with those processes. But we are actually a systems change organization by definition, because diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Related take movies and vision to watch to your favorite comfort zone.
Mama Pat, I see you. Can you go on mute?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's one of my people, sorry. So diversity, equity, inclusion is actually programming, right? Those are the things that we put in place. What we're talking about are the actual structures that affect how we live, how we move, where we live, how we are employed, how our children are treated, how we are educated, how we interact with the policing and carceral structures that we have. So rather than programming, we're talking about the actual policies and structures. And those are the things that we seek to impact because those are long lasting. Our mission, again, is to center impacted communities, mobilize accountable bodies to advance racially equitable systems and policies that ensure all people in the St. Louis region can thrive. And our vision, and this is very important, we envision a St. Louis region where, regardless of race and zip code, there's justice for all, an opportunity to thrive, and a boundless possibility for all of our youth. What we know is that race is embedded in everything that we do in this region and in this nation. I'm going to do something interactive, and I'm not going to ask you to come off mute. Can somebody tell me when the city of St. Louis was incorporated or when it was first recognized as a city? I'll give you just a couple of seconds if somebody wants to drop it in the chat for me. And I can't see the chat, so someone's going to have to tell me what's said. Do we have an answer?
Not yet.
I'll give you an answer. So St. Louis is, historians say that St. Louis is recognized as a city, as a place, a community, starting in 1764. But we also know that enslaved people were brought to this region starting in 1720. So if 44 years before this community that is now a region was recognized as really being, a city, a metropolis, a place where people want to come, but enslaved people are already there. What does that say about the systems that were in place to build the economy and the housing and the infrastructure of everything that we've built of value in this region? We know then that it was built on the bodies of those who were enslaved. And if it was built on the bodies of those who were enslaved, then that means that it is, dare I say, corrupt, or if nothing else, cracked and flawed. And if it's cracked and flawed and it's built on a racist system of enslavement, then how then do we correct that if the very foundation of what we've built is built on the bondature of others? You can't build something solid on something that is built on something that is on a flawed foundation. As a city planner, as someone that has been a municipal building director, I know that a flawed foundation cannot stand. And what we saw in 2014 was the result of a flawed foundation. So how did we get here and what events led us to this work? And I think I alluded to it. These are our signature priorities, which we reference consistently. And I'm just putting that there for you guys to think about as we go through this. In 2014, a young man by the name of Michael Brown Jr., who is to the right of the screen, was killed And so let's be clear, there are lots of theories and lots of things that are said about why Michael was killed. But what we know is an 18-year-old young man who graduated from high school on August the 1st of 2014 was walking to his grandmother's house, and then he was killed in the street on August the 9th. So August the 1st, he graduates from high school. August the 9th, he's killed, and he laid in the street for 4.5 hours. And he was not given the dignity of being covered. The covering that he was provided was by a neighbor who went and got a sheet and covered his body. I was at home on that day folding laundry, and I got a text message telling me to go on my social media. And this was before you could go live on Facebook, but you could upload videos. And I saw video after video of young people posting Michael's body. And in talking to his father, family members of his also saw his body laying in the street. As the parent of a 20-year-old, my son was 10 when Michael was killed. There is nothing I can imagine a young man doing that could necessitate not only him being killed and laying in the street as he's walking home from the store, but also his body being given the indignity of laying in the ground for 4.5 hours without the dignity of being covered and respected. And so what happened is all hell broke loose. And let's be clear, there was anger over Michael's killing, but what we also saw was an anger over the fact that this was not just generations, not just decades, but centuries of injustice and centuries of a flawed foundation finally cracking apart. We had issues with policing for profit. We had issues with people being held in our justice systems without a right to a speedy trial. We had issues with people not being able to receive lending in order to buy homes. Even to this day, if you live in St. Louis City, you're less likely to get a mortgage than if you live in St. Louis County. And if you live in St. Louis County, you're less likely to get a mortgage in North St. Louis County than if you live in West St. Louis County. And so when we talk about what bubbled over and what occurred in 2014, it was a reaction, and it was the community finally saying, we're tired, enough is enough, and no more young people are going to die at the hands of the police, but also something has to be done because the whole damn system is guilty. Michael died because of systemic racism. The definition that we utilize for systemic racism is entrenched institutional policies, practices, behaviors that systemically disadvantage people of color and systemically benefit white people. One of the things that people don't realize is that at one point Ferguson was a sundown town. And a lot of the Black people in particular who moved into Ferguson had been displaced from Kinloch when the airport decided to expand, and some of the industrial parks also wanted to expand. So land was taken from Kinloch. People were pushed out of Kinloch and pushed into Ferguson. And so there were sections of Ferguson that were basically became Black in a sundown town. And so there were decades of tension between the police and this Black community that had never been wanted in Ferguson. But what we know is that there were pockets like this throughout the St. Louis region. When I moved to St. Louis, I was told not to go too far south. And then I know other people that were told not to go too far north if they were white, right? And if you're from St. Louis, let's be honest, you heard those same things. But what we know is if you were white and you went north of Delmar, the Delmar divide, right? You were a lot safer than a Black person, possibly, when it came to police engagement going south, or even going west to Clayton. Or like me at one point working in West St. Louis County. And the engagement that I can say I had, even working as an employee with some of the law enforcement out there. So when there is an advantage by some based upon their colors, particularly in this instance, white individuals, the white community, that puts those of color, in this case, we're talking about Michael and Black people, but generally people of color, the system is typically imbalanced. When one color, typically white people, based upon how this country was founded and who was given the privilege in this country, there's an imbalance. And when you have that imbalance, the system can never be balanced out organically. So how did we get here again? These are some of the definitions that we have in terms of system and systemic racism. So systems are overlapping and they're nested and they're networked. There are subsystems that operate within broader systems. So we talked about housing. So you live in a certain zip code because that's the only place where you can rent. And you can't rent because you can only rent because you can only get a certain type of job. You can only get a certain type of job because maybe you have a certain type of background. Maybe your background is because you couldn't go to college, or you couldn't, your credit is poorer than other people. Why is your credit poor? Well, our system of credit was created to lock people out. When was it fair? When people are poor, it's very expensive to be poor. You're paying much more in service fees. You're paying much more in deposits. If by some means, until recently, you fell into debt because of your health issues, that went on your credit report. And now we're looking at that relief from having that being on your credit report coming back on your credit report. How many people will now be locked out of the system because of poor credit due to health issues coming back to haunt them now? We also know that there's a web of relationships. So who do you know that benefits you? Who do you know that gave your child a job? And how many people are locked out of those type of relationships because of who you went to high school with, right? We talk about that a lot in St. Louis. Where did you go to high school? Most people don't realize that while that may seem like a fun conversation, that also is a way of finding out where you actually live. What zip code are you from? And so the busing program that has been discontinued and is largely not at use as it used to be was a means to get around that question, because where did you go to high school was one way of figuring out, oh, yeah, you live in that neighborhood, right? You live in that zip code. So those connections and those relationships build into the systems that create systemic racism, because we have all these different ways of identifying and then marginalizing people out of the systems that we often lock others out of, or that some people who look like me are locked out of. I fully understand that I have privilege because I am educated. I'm not first generation, I'm not second generation, I'm not even third generation. But I also know that when I walk down the street, nobody cares how much education I have. And if I get stopped by the wrong police officer, they're not going to care who I work for. And quite honestly, who I work for may not be an advantage. So understanding interactions, understanding how systems feed into each other, understanding the conversations we have and how those can also lead into perception and then also into the systems that we perpetuate, lead into the systemic racism, whether intrinsic, overt, or covert, that led into where we are currently. Additionally, how did we get here? Segregation, property taxes, and public infrastructure, employment and economic opportunities, public safety investment. What we see is a lack of investment in certain parts of the city and the county versus others. I live on the other side of the river, just on the other side of East St. Louis. And, people love to drive through East St. Louis and say, oh, it's a shame that this happened. But how did that happen? There was a moving out of individuals as people moved up from the South, and East St. Louis became too Black for the people who were living in East St. Louis. And they moved over into Belleville, which is where I now live. And what I heard all the time when I worked for this community is, well, we don't want this community to become East St. Louis. And it was said to me as a Black employee. So what does that mean when a Black employee hears, we don't want our community to become like East St. Louis? It means that you don't want it to become too Black. Regardless of the fact of me paying property taxes and being an employee. So the languages that we use are often coded. And the lack of investment is often because we don't want to live next to or be by people who are other, but that often leads to the narrowing of who has versus who does not have. And that also led to what happened in 2014, because the lack of investment, the lack of opportunity, the lack of the ability for people to raise their families, take care of their children, provide them with educational opportunity, give them someplace that is safe and clean, and have the quality of life that they were seeing other people have strictly because they were able to move to wherever they wanted to move, work wherever they wanted to work, get the opportunity to go to school wherever they wanted to go to school. And yes, even in the public school system, buy into the district that they wanted to buy into. When I bought my house, I was able to look at the district. There are some people that when they buy their house, some districts are just out of their reach because they're locked out of the lending system. And they may not be able to afford going to private schools. And there may not be a charter school. And quite honestly, charter schools don't necessarily they may not be the answer for everything, particularly when we're trying to invest in our young people in a way that is sustainable of community. So all of these things get into how we got to where we are. The other thing that we have to look at is programs versus policies. I mentioned that Forward Through Ferguson is not a DEI organization because DEI is programming. So programs are short-term interventions. They create temporary improvements. So, are we having affinity groups? Are we having conversations around different things? Are we having, speakers come in and talk to our groups? Or are we actually creating covenants that we choose to live by, that are created by legislation and regulation? And do they actually inform and create accepted mores and ethics? Do they actually reflect who we want to be and how we should be, and not just how things are and how we can work within how things are? I'm akin to be a policy person. I want to make things be as opposed to make do with how they are. And so here's the synergy, right? So we tend to be working program, practice, systems, policy. But the policy is going to be shaky if you're starting with the programming. But if you start with the foundation of the policy and build your systems and your practice and your programming from that, then you have a firm foundation and you get to where you actually want to be on a solid foundation with systems that are equitable and longstanding. Your practices aren't those that are continually questioned because you built them on a solid foundation. The systems that are in place are those in which everyone agrees are equitable, create momentum, and take into account the momentum and where we want to go in an upward direction. And then the programming can come out of that, naturally, as opposed to trying to build programming on something and then have policy reflects a program that can come and go. Programming, as we're seeing, can shift based upon attitude. But when you have policy that is firm, that is based on legislation, that is based upon our highest and best, as well as legislated, the systems that come out of that policy are firmly rooted. And then you can build on your practices, and then you can create your programming. So then racial equity. Quite honestly, racial equity is a state in which a person's life outcomes cannot be predicted by their race. When our region's systems, education, housing, healthcare, job, transportation, et cetera, work well for all people, so the disparities are closed and all residents, regardless of their race and zip code, have justice and opportunity to thrive. So if Johnny lives here and Jim lives here, one is Black, one is white. I'm not going to say which one is Black and which one is white. But they have decent education, decent housing, decent jobs, decent transportation, decent healthcare, and they just happen to be different races. Why shouldn't they both be able to succeed? But what we find is they don't have equal access to those things. And then therefore, their race plays a factor into why they can or cannot succeed. So this is forward through Ferguson's theory of change. This is what we do, who we're trying to impact, and the changes that we expect to see when we provide these impacts. So each of the colors goes with each of the through lines. We have 4 signature priorities, and those 4 signature priorities actually came out of the Ferguson Commission's report. So we have justice for all, an opportunity to thrive, youth at the center, and racial equity. And what we know is that racial equity is a through line. By a through line, we know that racial equity impacts these other 3 just by the foundation, again, that we've been built on. So we utilize storytelling as a signature priority because we know that by allowing people to tell their stories, and we allow them to tell their stories, to be seen and to be heard in their own words, and also in the ways that we collect data and share that information, we can impact residents and change makers because they're seeing themselves, right? And that allows us to increase awareness of the structural racism and how it contributes to the inequitable outcomes in the area. And if the St. Louis region can recognize that, that also draws attention nationally to those things. And we see that as a legacy of the Ferguson uprising, because people saw what happened in Ferguson and they started evaluating and trying to understand what was going on in their own communities. And they still do. I can go through an airport and have on a Forward Through Ferguson t-shirt, or if people ask me who I work for and I say Forward Through Ferguson, people automatically say Ferguson, and the questions start coming. So people recognize what Ferguson meant. And I will say that while the Black Lives Matter movement was starting, the term and the phrase definitely became more popular and more utilized in the wake of the Ferguson uprising. We also advance policy or system change by providing and organizing strategy support to collectives and coalitions. So we work with other organizations. We recently were part of the DRT, which was the Defund, Re-envision, and Transform coalition, looking at how much money was being spent in the St. Louis region strictly toward policing and corporal punishment versus providing resources towards some of the social resources such as social workers, mental health support. Does everything need to go toward more guns? Does everything need to go toward more cameras? Can we possibly look at providing mental health support? Can we look at some intervention programming? working in coalitions with 4 and 5 other organizations, and there are some entities where we're working with as many as 10. But working with those other Black-led organizations to answer those priority calls to actions of the Ferguson Commission report, again, 189 calls to action cannot be done by one organization, one individual. It takes a collective, and it takes, in many instances, many collectives. It takes many individuals. And so by working and showing this work, we also are able to show that by working as a collective, we can impact new policies and show programming and resources, and also motivate others to get into this work. We also make policy recommendations that are grounded in our use of trailblazing data and research. And we use this by making accountability bodies. So one of the things that was mentioned was our Transforming 911 document. I think it was on the website that was shared with you all as part of my bio, and more than happy to share a link to that as well. So that was an example of us going in, looking at the fact that the infrastructure of the 911 system in the St. Louis County, specifically looking at St. Louis County data, we're looking at the St. Louis City data this year, is flawed. Most people don't realize that when you call 911, you're not necessarily getting a dispatcher that is directly in your geographic area. You might be talking to someone who is on the other side of the county, and by the time they get the call over to someone that can get to you, it may be too late. We also found that sometimes people are calling 911 just because they need a ride to the doctor or for other things that are not necessarily emergent, but that's the only means by which they can get assistance. So the Transferring 911 document provided resource and the ability to show that something has to be done with the infrastructure of the 911 system. And we've been seeing some shifting in some of the things that we're seeing in St. Louis County and in St. Louis City in terms of how they're managing the 911 systems. Providing racial equity capacity building programs. Forward Through Ferguson is a 501c3, so we do count on donations. We do some work with foundational donations as well. We have our Racial Equity Summit, which is coming up in August, but about 15% of our budget is actually our racial equity capacity building work, where we work with organizations and with individuals to increase their awareness and accountability within their organizations and just in the St. Louis region in general. So via trainings and roundtables and workshops and providing equity assessments to organizations to see how equitable they are, it allows them to really lean in if they are truly concerned about equity and the practice of equity and their programming, to anchor themselves in that, to increase availability for their employees, to provide feedback on how they feel within their organizations regarding their practices, and then to create plans to actually move toward becoming more equitable in how they move. And then finally, we lead next practices in justice philanthropy. I saw that one of our board members for the Racial Healing and Justice Fund is on here. So shout out to you, girl. I appreciate you hopping on. Hey, Angel. So we lead next practices in justice philanthropy. So we were an anchor partner in the creation of the Racial Healing and Justice Fund. What we found is that there were people doing the work of the 189 calls to action on both sides of the river, because we are a regional organization. Some were doing the work before Michael was killed, but quite a few people mobilized after he was killed. It was individuals, it was business owners opening businesses, it was nonprofits that were formed to attack pieces that definitely fit within the calls to action. But what we found is that traditional philanthropy passed them by. And if any of you sit on any boards or have ever applied for a grant, typically, if you are a small nonprofit or if you're a one-person mom and shop, you get passed by the traditional philanthropic organizations for those who are more mainstream, those who are bigger, and more those who have the track record. So with the Racial Healing and Justice Fund, we were able to put over $1 million into the hands of organizations and individuals who had businesses, who had programming that was doing the work that the commission and the people who created the report prioritized, whether it was a small business owner that had a Black bookstore, whether it was women who were doing doula work, whether it were people that had programming working with our youth and our young people, people that were dealing with families that had gone through the trauma of violence, allowing them to enter into the philanthropy without all of the hoops and all of the corporate speak and requirements that are often put to them via traditional philanthropic community and giving, and putting the money in their hands through a trusting relationship. We have seen, and we will be reporting, that the work was able to ripple into others, and now they are able to influence and to support others doing the work. And so this year, we're building out the full model, because I mentioned that Forward Through Ferguson was created as a request of the Ferguson Commission. So was the Racial Healing and Justice Fund. And this year, we'll be introducing the fund, the infrastructure of it, because the fund was requested to be at least a 25-year endowed fund to turn philanthropy on its head and put money into the hands of Black and Brown movement leaders to allow them to do the work of the 189 calls to action. Something's happening. Okay. Oop, going too fast. So the question that was asked in your title for tonight was improvement or inertia. And I want to give you the definition of inertia. Inertia is a tendency to do nothing or to remain unchanged. And, the problem runs deeper than bureaucrat inertia. I would say that the inertia is just that. It's bureaucratic, it's systemic, but it's not anything that came out of the Ferguson Commission or even the work that's being done in community or the work of Forward Through Ferguson. I think the inertia is for those who have not kept themselves up to date or have not allowed themselves to be challenged or to dive in and to do the work that the Ferguson Commission asked for, or to even familiarize themselves with the work that the Ferguson Commission said needed to be done. I don't feel that we are a product of inertia. I don't feel that any of the organizations that we coalition with or that we support or that we know are out there doing the work are in a state of inertia. And honestly, I don't think that at large the region is in a state of inertia, but I think that there are those who benefit from, one, ignoring the progress that has been made or the improvements that have been made, but also those who choose not to be a participant in the improvements that are being made. So my response to that question is improvement, but with an asterisk. I have a list of some of the things that have been done since Michael was killed, but it's a sampling of the work that the community has been doing since 2014. But I mentioned that Black bodies were brought to the St. Louis area as enslaved chattel in 1720. The work that we're talking about, we can say it's multi-generational, but a generation we know is 20 to 30 years. Just in St. Louis, 1720. We know in the United States, we can go back into the 1600s. So if we're talking about change and improvement in a space that is multi-century, inertia is not a word that we should be using. We're going to look at what we've done, and we will take pride in what improvement we have done in that 10 years, but we know that it is a drop in the bucket because we literally have to rebuild systems. We cannot rely on programming. We cannot rely on conversation. We cannot rely on guilt or tears or frustration, but I want to make clear some of the things that I'm aware of have been done. So there's been an increase in community engagement, advocacy, and voter registration in the 10 years since Michael passed away. People don't fall for whatever is said anymore. And I've seen a challenging of systems and conversations and people showing up in places that typically they would never have shown up before Michael died. There is not the acceptance of the status quo and what anyone says in the halls of government, in their children's school boards, in the classrooms. That's a good thing. Questioning is a good thing. Contrary to what people believe, voter registration actually did increase. Whether or not people show up and are actively engaged consistently, that's another conversation. But voter registration did increase after Michael was killed. Body cameras. Some people don't like them, but what we have found is that the use of body cameras, while they may not always be turned on as they should be, when they are turned on and when they are utilized along with board cameras, have led to a lot of people seeing things that they never would have seen before in terms of how police sometimes interact with individuals, and I would even say often interact with individuals. Use of force policies for St. Louis City and St. Louis County Police Department did not exist before Michael Brown was killed. So how are people detained? Can we use a chokehold? Can we use gagging? How do we restrain people? How are people held with cufflinks before their hands, behind their backs? How do we hold them down on the ground? There was no guideline for that before Michael was killed. On the economic side of things, because I was an economic development director, St. Louis Development Corporation created an economic justice action plan, and they actually have updated it even this year, even in the face of everything that we're facing. They've given a progress report on that plan that was created, I want to say around 2021, 2022, in the height of pandemic with masking on. They were doing focus groups with different community organizations, as well as town halls via Zoom and in person, to talk to community about what they can do to make economic development and development in general more equitable in St. Louis City. And I've seen a difference. I know that there's always room for improvement. I don't know the ins and outs of some of the criticisms that I've seen, but I know that this plan itself is unlike anything I've seen anywhere. And I definitely have not seen it anywhere else in the region. So St. Louis City should be proud of itself. I don't know of any place in the Midwest that has anything like this, to be perfectly honest. The College Kids Savings Program was launched after the death of Michael Brown Jr. That actually was also a call to action from the Ferguson Commission report. So when Mayor Tashara Jones was the city of St. Louis treasurer, this savings plan was created. So any child in the city of St. Louis public schools or in a charter school within the city of St. Louis was automatically enrolled in this savings plan. And $50 was put into the plan. But when you think about it, $50 put into a savings plan, and parents were welcome to add whatever amount of money they wanted to as their child was going through the school system, and have the monies available when most parents didn't even have $50 made, that they had to put into a banking account in an interest-bearing account for their children, is amazing. Unfortunately, that program was halted as far as automatic enrollment by St. Louis Public School Board. So if parents want to enroll, they have to work directly now with Adam Lane, the St. Louis City Treasurer, to get their children enrolled. But just the fact that that was created and that it still does exist, and these highlights are actually linked. So when I share this, you will be able to click on the link and go to these websites to take a look at these documents. I spoke about the coalition work and the fact that we don't work in a vacuum. It's not just us. So there was the Close the Workhouse campaign, headed up by Action St. Louis and Art City Defenders and others in the community, Freedom Community Center, for one, that got the workhouse closed. So in St. Louis City, there was a building where individuals were being housed in a manner that was often inhumane. The facility was old, it was dangerous, and sickness reigned, as well as yeah, so we're now dealing with a situation at the Criminal Justice Center where a lot of the conditions at the workhouse are being basically transferred over to there, but the workhouse was closed. And that was due to coalition and community. I mentioned the Defund, Re-envision, Transform Coalition. I linked that as well. We sunset that last year, but if you click the link that is on this page and you go to read that farewell document, you will see all that was accomplished, including diverting some money from policing into affordable housing and to some of the programming that I talked about that allows for some of the social services needs that the community desperately needed in the region. And then I also mentioned the Racial Healing and Justice Fund, which is dear to my heart. And this is a link to our website that talks about the work of what the fund did. I'm not going to play this, but it will be linked in this PowerPoint, and I'll also provide a link in the chat once we go to questions that you can look at later. But this is our 10-year retrospective video that was done, and I think Marge got to actually see it when it premiered at our Unflinching Progress fundraiser in September. But it talks about some of the work that Forward Through Ferguson did and has seen done as we have moved forward in the last 10 years. And wait a minute, hold. On August I'm about to lose power on my computer, so bear with me. I might have to switch to my phone for a second. On August the 8th and 9th, we will be hosting our Racial Equity Summit. That information will be coming out shortly in terms of registration as well as sponsorships. We welcome community to join us. In times like this, we feel like coming together as community is more important than ever. And so we hope that you can be with us. And with that, I thank you, and we're going to go to a Q&A. I'm going to stop screen sharing because I've said a lot, and I've seen a lot in chat. And so I'm back.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I will say that I went to the Unflinching Progress and the summit, and both of those events are really, to me, encouragement to keep fighting the good fight. A lot of committed people that may be active in social justice or are looking to become more connected to those that are in that work. So I encourage people to get out, maybe outside your comfort zone, and learn about many of the works that's going on in the greater St. Louis area. We do have a question in the chat asking, do you worry that the progress that has been made will reverse with current Republican politics?
I am plugging in my computer, so that's why I'm off screen.
Okay.
I'll be back in just a second, but I think that worry is an understatement. But I'm not in a place where I can allow myself to worry. I'm really at a point where I'm more angered that people became so comfortable and gullible
Yes.
that we would allow ourselves to get to this point. And so rather than allow myself to be fearful. I think Yane, our comms person, and the rest of our staff would say that, I think, Marjorie, you heard it, we're unflinching.
Yes.
That's the only way that we can be. I actually have some profanity that follows the term unflinching, but I won't use that right now.
Yeah. There's also a question about why did St. Louis Public Schools stop the automatic enrollment in the scholarship fund?
I can't speak to why. I can speak as to what I observed. So there were concerns from some parents regarding the growth of their investment in the fund. There were questions regarding their ability and how much money they can add or how much money they can take out and when they can take it out. There was a lot of conversation back and forth between the treasurer's office and St. Louis Public Schools. And I think there was also a recommendation from the now former superintendent. In the end, the decision was made. First, it was to pause, and then the decision was made to stop the automatic enrollment. I don't know if privacy played a role in it or not. That may have, I'm not quite sure, but the automatic enrollment does not exist anymore.
But parents can sign up if they want to.
From my understanding, they still can sign up, but they have to go directly through the treasurer's office. And I'm not even sure if the information is provided to them automatically.
Oh,
You know, they have to get like a little packet. You actually have to find the information yourself now, from my understanding.
Yeah. So I think that's it in the chat. If people have questions that they want to yell out or raise your hand.
Please raise your hand if you have a question. We have this expert. I learned so much, and I'm speaking from all of us. You were dynamic, inspirational. We've learned so much. And I'm just thinking about if you can share what kind of things we can do to support your efforts. And then I'll be quiet, other people ask questions.
Try to be polite. I did drop into the chat a couple of things. I dropped a link to our Medium page, which provides links to our retrospective. So we have an overall retrospective document that kind of gives an overview of everything for the last 10 years. But then there are 4 individual documents that show youth at the center, justice for all, racial equity, opportunity to thrive, and it breaks down. And within those documents are links to some of our studies and some of the work that we've done. That YouTube clip is actually the video that I did not show that Marge was able to see at our fundraiser that is an audio version of our retrospective and has like some video image as well. So in terms of how to support us, donations are always great. So we are, our email, I'm sorry, our website is forwardthroughferguson.org, and I will drop that in the chat as well.
And I'll also say that one of the things that I have found useful is to use their information in my own advocacy when I am writing letters or
Right.
talking with legislators and office staff. And I'll say, according to Forward Through Ferguson, it's from the Ferguson Commission, and it raises awareness that there is serious scholarly information. And nowadays, sometimes people don't even realize that we still do that.
I also recommend following us on our social media. So on Facebook, we are Forward Through Ferguson. On Instagram, That other app that used to have a bird on it, we are STL Change. On LinkedIn, we are Forward Through Ferguson. On Threads, we are STL Change. And if you go to our website or actually, if you go on our website, you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter. And we do not bombard you. You probably get something about once a month or on special occasion, but it keeps you informed about what we're doing. And at the bottom, we try to put a little digest of other information about what's going on regionally or even nationally that people might want to be informed about. But it definitely keeps you in touch with us and what we're doing. And as I mentioned, the Racial Equity Summit is coming up. So be on the lookout, especially if you subscribe to our newsletter or if you follow us on social media for information about how to sponsor, how to volunteer, how to attend.
Jill, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation and your time and sharing your experience and what you guys have been working on and are continuing to work on. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts. Sorry, I'm trying to lower my hand, trying to multitask. I'm wondering, excuse me, if you have some thoughts on, so I don't think there's, my background is political science, serving in the military, serving in government. And based on available information, I don't think there's just one cause of what happened with this past election. But one of the challenges I've had is last year, as I was campaigning for Harris and Walz, I had liberals absolutely refuse to vote for Harris Walz, equating them with Trump and Vance, saying there was absolutely no difference between them and nothing to be gained by voting Democrats. And I'm a little confused by that because I see us moving into an authoritarian system, which I don't think benefits any of us, or, you know, except for a couple wealthy people. And I don't know how to talk with people because if we have democracy, we at least have the potential to work on all these problems that we have, you know, the legacy of our country. And I don't know how, you know, when they tell me Kamala Harris, these are liberals telling me Kamala Harris is Satan, but yet I don't know if people just didn't think what's happening would happen. So I don't know if you have thoughts on how to talk with liberals about what's going on or about
So
alternatives.
I want to be clear. So Forward Through Ferguson is a 501c3. So I cannot have a
I'm
discussion
so
about,
sorry. I
no, that's
wasn't
fine.
thinking.
I will say that Kamala Harris is my soror. So I belong to the same sorority, but we are a 501c3. And so I can't direct you as far as how to have those conversations with people. But what I will say is that people are inclined to believe what they want to believe because they want to. Does that make sense? People will
Right.
believe, people are inclined to believe what they want to believe because that's what they want to believe.
Right.
When people are coming and having such heavy discussions and are so adamant about what they, I'm not sure that there's much that you could do to change those minds. So the question is, where are you putting your energy and what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on the party and the individual? Are you focusing on the systems in place? Because let's look at, for my purposes, when Michael Brown was killed, the state of Missouri was being led by a Democrat. The Ferguson Commission was convened by a Democratic governor. And so this is beyond anything that goes through a party in terms of my work and the work of my organization. So we are a 501c3. I will definitely say that we are progressive. I will definitely say that our base is liberal in its leanings and in its progressive, but we do not participate in political discussions or particularly in discussions regarding political candidates. Because what we are working with is so much more than a candidate or a party or a person. It's structural and it's intrinsic. think there's a question.
Karen, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm just gonna chime in. Jill, in the latest Loud and Clear, I shared some tips on how to have these difficult conversations. So if you didn't get a copy of the February Loud and Clear, I will definitely make sure that you've gotten one.
There's
Um,
there
Thank
is
you both. And I'm sorry, I spaced out on the 501c3 thing.
That's
And to
fine.
clarify, I'm not a party person. I'm not in a party
Yeah,
politics.
I
My
completely
concern right now
understand.
is democratic system government of, by, and for we the people, all
Right,
people. So,
right.
so I apologize. And I'll
Oh, no,
look
no.
back at my email for the Loud and Clear.
Okay.
Most
Thank you both.
definitely. There is a question asking us, what programs does our organization have in place to rebuild the Black family? Again, we are not a program-based organization. And let me backtrack. One, that would have to state that there's a problem with the Black family that needs to be rebuilt. I would say, based upon this nation and the things that are happening in this nation, there's a problem with families, period, not just Black families. Secondly, we are not an organization that does specific programming. We do trainings, and we support organizations that might have that programming, but we don't specifically do programming to address Black families. We might have some policy work that we do, or we might be supporting an organization that does that type of work, but we are not necessarily we are not a program-based organization. We are a systems change organization.
Nancy Nix?
Thank you. First, I want to say that I'm the person who came up with the title for the program. And what I meant by inertia was not on the part of Forward Through Ferguson,
Oh, no,
but
not at all.
rather on the part of the larger community. And I have to say that the list of initiatives that you left us with was really encouraging to see that, yes, it's a long, slow slog, but there is movement. One of the things that I struggle with is the tendency, both personally and in the white community more broadly, to look at community service and Band-Aid kinds of solutions as opposed to the structural kinds of solutions that you so rightly point out are the foundation for any kind of lasting change. But how, as an individual, can you identify ways that you or the organizations of which you're a part can have an impact on those larger structures?
So one answer is, I think that it starts personally. I think if you really think about it, how many times have you been in an organization or heard a conversation in an organization or been a part of a process where you just kind of felt like this is not everything that we could or should be doing? It just seems like we're just doing something. Right?
Of course.
And so, but you do it anyway, as opposed to taking the step back and saying, we could actually be doing more. We could actually go deeper, because I think some people don't want to be the one that raises their hand and says, you know what, we could go deeper in this. I mentioned our racial equity capacity building work that we do. There are some organizations and there's some individuals who don't necessarily trust that inner voice or know how to really amplify that inner voice within their organization or even personally. And they either seek that work through us or through other entities that do similar work to hone themselves to understand microaggression, macroaggression, structural racism, systemic racism, and how to recognize it. And there are even groups that meet within the St. Louis region where people are teaching each other, not necessarily for pay, but teaching each other, white people, white males, white women to white women, how to recognize these behaviors within their organizations, but even going through trainings with organizations like ours to audit and look at their systems that they have in place. And it may not even be that deep as going through an actual assessment. In many instances, it's calling a thing a thing. When you recognize language, say something about the language. I saw at the beginning of the meeting that you all did a land acknowledgement, and that is beautiful. And at some point, someone had to say that we need to acknowledge that we are on land that is stolen. That's a systemic change in your organization because you always weren't doing that. So that's one pillar of something that you do that you changed. So then at some point, someone else may recognize something that needs to be changed, and work has to be done around that. So whether it's through training, whether it's through conversation, whether it's through self-study and self-reflection, I can't give you the answer of what has to be done, but I just encourage you that you have to do that work and it has to be continual. I do work daily, not just because it's what I do for a living, but because as a human being, as a mother, as a Black woman in this nation and in this region, I have to make sure that I'm not allowing myself to fall into the mindset of self-hate or corporate speak or patriarchy that often allows us to go down one path as opposed to a path of equity. And so it's a personal path that everyone has to take internally, but it also is a pathway we have to take when we're in groups to speak out, to encourage work as a group, and to seek training, if necessary, to undo the things that often we are taught or that we learn by affinity.
Amen to that. Nancy, another Nancy. I can see you, but yeah, okay.
Okay. I'm not the swiftest on the bottom of this.
Hey,
Okay.
you got it.
I want to say that it was an excellent presentation, but I also want to say that I'm overwhelmed because you had these wonderful slides. If I tried to write down what was on the slide, you had moved on to another slide. So Nancy is asking, because I can only do one whelm at a time, if you would share those slides.
That's what I mentioned. I'm going to be sending the slides.
And
Okay.
also in the chat, some other things were mentioned that I'm going to throw back to Karen that she can share with us too, because Karen likes to do jobs. So I'm just going to say that. I'm also going to say that an eye-opener for me was a program called Witnessing Whiteness. I was not really self-aware. And if I look in the group, I know that some of my compadres also went through that program. I moved some, I still have some to move. But I'm just saying, I appreciate your presentation today, but I also am a processor person that has to read through it and more than once to get it because I'm not gifted. So I'm just being honest. But thank you again.
Thank you for sharing.
And Jean's hand is up.
Yeah, I also want to say thank you so much, Annissa. It's incredible what you're doing and the work that's going on. And related to the last point you made, I was thinking about just some basic things that are in our English lexicon that are rooted in prejudice and racial hatred. And it's phrases that people use every day and just have no awareness of where they came from. And there's a lot of them. But I think, that even doing that would be a start to becoming more aware. The other thing I wanted to ask you, you said that you have 4 areas of focus and one you call youth at the center. Can you explain that a little more?
It's just that. So, in some of our programming, especially in some of the work that we do with Racial Healing and Justice Fund, we seek to support organizations that support our young people.
Oh, okay.
And the idea is that, I'm 53 years old, but I have a 20-year-old, and I want to see a world and a place where everyone is able to thrive, especially our youth. You know, we have lived through a certain phase and a certain space and time, but what about the young people that are coming behind us? What about their ability to thrive? And so our youth are at the center of everything that we do. Whitney Houston saying, I believe the children are our future.
Mm-hmm.
Youth at the center. At the Racial Equity Summit in 2023, the last panel was actually young people, the oldest of which was, I believe, 23 years old. And the youngest was about 17 or 18. And they all were speaking about how the Ferguson uprising impacted them and their trajectory.
Mm.
So these were people that were 6, 7, 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And they had lessons to teach us. And they definitely had things to say to us about how we have handled ourselves in that period of time. So if we center our youth and understand that what we're doing, while it would be great if it happened in our lifetime, if we center them, it's very clear what we have to do.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the chat, and someone said that they had trouble looking at the live stream, and Michelle is aware of the issues that we are having with our technology at the moment, and we will work to get that fixed. And Mimi, I know you're on here. You also mentioned some programs. Hi, friend, from Wash U. So thank you. And I've made a copy of the chat, and I will share that with everyone. And I'm looking at the clock. They would have kicked us out of the Clayton Center by now. So we cannot, I'm speaking for all of us. You were inspirational. You were educational. And you were aspirational. So thank you. We've
Thank
learned
you.
so much, and we will be in touch. We will be in touch. And you're going to see, I'm sure, a lot of us in August.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
for
that
sure.
I'm sure a lot of us will be there. And hopefully all of you have it on your calendars for our much anticipated program about when did diversity become a dirty word. So plan on joining us in March, and I hope we get to be in person. Marge, thank you for getting this phenomenal speaker, and everyone have a nice Valentine's Day, however you celebrate that. And Jill, I don't know if I have your email address, so please put that in the chat. And thank you everyone for joining us, and hope we are going to be part of the change agents that you are working to bring to our region. And we can collaborate on those successes. And I'm a North County girl, so this is my neck of the woods. So thank you, everyone. Be safe, and thank you for joining us last minute through Zoom. It's not the same as being in the room where it happened, but hopefully you found it timely, you found it inspirational, and you're thinking, these are things that we can do. And so I look forward to hearing your ideas as we incorporate what we learned and bringing that to the table for women's voices. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. And